So today we're working on the muscles of the arm and chest. As we see our rat in a supine position, we have two arms, one that's partially dissected and one we're going to show you how to do the dissection. So the only problem really with the arms is that they're kind of scrunched up. So at some point, you're probably going to have to hold the hand and kind of stretch it outward just a little bit in order to see both parts of the limb, the upper arm and the forearm. And as you can see from the image right there, there's a lot of fascia right around the elbow and over the muscles. So you're going to have to remove some of that fascia, but the biggest or the trickiest part about this particular dissection is that the fascia is very tight to the muscles. So there are some times where you try to pull at fascia and it doesn't pull away like loose connective tissue. It really holds on to the muscle and you have a chance of tearing the fibers, as you can tell by pulling on it right here, how it looks like it's pulling at it. What we want to try to do is separate and find the biceps brachii in the upper arm. It's going to be very small in the rat because the biceps brachii, if you think about it on a human, it's the anterior portion of your upper arm. Ours is fairly large, and the rat is going to be a really, really small muscle. It looks very small and rounded, almost like a little bulge. And the reason for this is because your biceps brachii flexes the arm or forearm at the elbow. If you think about a rat, though, rats are walking around, they're not doing a whole lot of flexing of the elbow. So they have very, very small biceps, but in return, they have very, very large triceps. So let's take a look at the bicep that's already dissected on this side. If we stretch the arm out just a little bit, what you're looking for right here is that small rounded muscle right on the anterior side. So the way that the camera is angled, it's going to look like it's kind of upwards on the arm, because remember that we're looking at their anterior side, but we're not looking at the arm the same way we look at our own. So if we kind of poke in there and you push the fibers away, you can grab it and it shows that it's going kind of from the upper shoulder, and the biceps actually passes the elbow joint and inserts on the radius. So when it contracts, it's going to pull the radius upward, which causes flexion of the forearm at the elbow joint. When you're looking for it on the undissected side, again, you're going to have some fascia in there. And you're probably going to have to push away a little bit at pieces of the pectoralis major, because the pectoral muscles insert on the humerus right near the biceps. So you might have to push a few of those fibers kind of upward in order to get underneath them. You see in this rat, we have to push the pectoral fibers a little bit towards the chest and upward to get underneath them, because they're going to insert on the humerus pretty close to where the biceps is. In this particular rat, you can see there's a little bit of dye right here from one of the arteries in the area, and the biceps is right above the dye. It's going to be rounded. You go right above there, and then you can see the bulge right here. There it is. Kind of pops out like a sphere almost. Very small and very rounded in terms of the rat as compared to ours. On the same side of the rat, as long as we have them on their back, the muscles of the forearm are going to be called flexors of the wrist. And that's because all of the muscles in the forearm, from the elbow to the wrist, as they contract, they originate up here on the humerus, but they travel all the way down the forearm and turn into tendons at the end, which then insert on metacarpals. So when these muscles contract, they're going to be pulling on these tendons, pulling on the hand, causing flexion of the wrist. So the whole group of them are called wrist flexors, or flexors of the wrist. And that's all of the muscles down here. And again, you might have to stretch the arm out a little bit. All of the muscles down here in the forearm will end up flexing the wrist if they're on the anterior side. And again, it's a little hard to separate them because the muscles are so tight together. If you can get your probe in there, you'll notice a few grooves that you can separate, but there's also a lot of connective tissue kind of holding them together. They're compartmentalized by connective tissue. Yeah, it's hard because it's so small too. Sorry guys, we'll try to get that camera right down on top of it. Camera just a little bit closer. So you can see the connective tissue being pulled off here. It's like a little sheet of white and it's really thick. So some of that you'll need to carefully tear away, but what you want to try not to do is tear the muscle fibers themselves. Starting at the elbow and then working your way down towards the wrist. So once that connective tissue is removed, this is that connective tissue, you'll start to see some separation between different muscles that are called flexors. So here's, for example, the difference, and you can see the tendon here that the muscle attaches to the bone down past the wrist. So these are flexors of the wrist. It's a whole group of muscles, superficially just inferior to the elbow, or just distal to the elbow, I should say. Okay, if you flip the rat over on his belly, now we're looking at the back side of your arm. So what would be equivalent to the posterior side of your human arm. So over here is an undissected side. You can still see a lot of fascia, not a lot of definition. And then if we switch over, this side has been dissected out or started to be dissected out, so we can see two major muscle groups. On the back of the arm, we're going to see the triceps instead of the biceps. So if we fold this muscle back, on the back you see two large pieces of the triceps brachii. On the anterior side, we saw biceps brachii. This is going to be triceps brachii because there are three bellies of the muscle. These are two of the bellies, and there should be a groove that you can see in between. You can kind of slide your probe along. And again, be very careful with connective tissue because if it's really tight to the muscle, it will take fibers with it as you start to pull it up. But we do want to try to separate those different portions of the muscle. Triceps brachii is going to do the opposite of biceps brachii. It originates up on the scapula and the humerus very similarly, all the way up here, but it's going to go again past the elbow and insert right on the olecranon, which is the large bump on the back of your elbow. So when that contracts, it's actually pulling on the elbow, which is going to straighten the elbow or extend the forearm. Down past those then, we have the opposite of what we had on the front. And again, you can see our fascia right here, our connective tissue that we've already cut off. And then here we have a little bit more definition. You can see the various muscles in the forearm, and these are called extensors of the wrist. So the exact opposite of what we saw on the other side. These extensors of the wrist are going to originate up on the humerus, and they're going to have the largest part of the muscle right here in your forearm before they convert to a tendon, which inserts on the hand or the metacarpals. When that muscle contracts, it's going to raise the hand or extend the wrist, pulling it back, as opposed to the flexors, which were on the front of the rat. So flexors on the front, extensors on the back, which extend the wrist. Triceps brachii extends the forearm at the elbow, and extensors of the wrist or wrist extensors extend the wrist. Last one for the group, we're going to flip back over and take a look just briefly at the chest muscles again, because technically, even though chest muscles are on the chest, they don't move the chest. They actually move the arm. So we can kind of look at these with the arm muscles. And you've got some major pectoral groups here, and you can tell very easily by the color change that exists between the different muscles. So what you need to do as a dissector is to get under the edges where you see those color changes and try to separate the muscles and really see how the direction of fiber changes from pectoralis major to pectoralis minor, which is, should see a large color change. These fibers are going to go more inward and up by the shoulder, whereas these are going to drop more downward, more inferiorly at an angle. So again, with that connective tissue, you want to take your probe very carefully and try to lift away gently, or you can use your forceps. What you really want to do at the beginning is find that separation line without digging fibers. So kind of lift very gently away at it. You can see my forceps underneath there to tear away at some of the connective tissue. And then you'll start to see a line or a hollow space between the fibers of one muscle, which is lying kind of on top of another muscle. And then you can start really getting your forceps or your probe into that division. Take away some of that connective tissue until we can see the separation of the two muscles. And you can always keep going back and cleaning up connective tissue until your muscle is really, really well defined on one side or both sides. So here's your inferior border. Oops, got a little hair on there. Here's your inferior border of pectoralis minor. And we would do the same thing here for the inferior border of pectoralis major, where the major and the minor come together and the fibers merge. They don't actually merge. They look like they're blending, but that's because we haven't found that distinguished line between. Usually there's a border of connective tissue that holds the two together. So your job is just to find that connective tissue line and tear that connective tissue off so that we can actually see the line between the muscles then and define it. Just like that. And then you can gently lift up on the muscle because technically one muscle is lying over the edge of the other one. So you want to kind of very gently use your probe or your forceps closed like I am. Kind of get under the edge and lift away until you are able to fully separate that line between the two muscles. And you can see our pectoralis minor here still has a little bit of connective tissue. We keep cleaning that up as we continue to work.